Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in Ottawa, and bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to this wildfire update. Do you know, when we last provided an update on July 9th, the wildfire situation in Canada looked quite different. And at that time, there was roughly about 410,000 hectares, or about a million acres, that had been burned. But since then, we know that wildfire activity has really grown and accelerated significantly, firstly in northwestern Ontario and then now in British Columbia. And today, we have more than 4 million hectares that have burned across the country. And there have been numerous communities evacuated in Ontario as well as in British Columbia. In southern BC, especially, there have been major evacuations and an estimated about 20,000 people that had to leave their homes. About 11,000 of those remain under evacuation orders. And I'd also like to point out, and I know Minister Gull-Masty will address this in her remarks, that there are about 8,600 First Nations peoples impacted by evacuations thus far. So we know that we're still in the heart of the wildfire season and that some communities across the country face really difficult and sometimes uncertain conditions. Nous savons que nous sommes toujours au cours de la saison de feux de forêt et la communauté partout au pays continue de faire face à des conditions très difficiles. I also want to take a moment to thank the first responders for their really tireless work in protecting families and homes and infrastructure and businesses and animals. And that includes the more than 500 international firefighters that are here from Mexico, from Australia, New Zealand, Costa Rica. The majority of them are supporting firefighting operations in British Columbia. So, as we heard earlier in the tech brief, wildfire activity really intensified in the month of July, and a lot of communities faced some challenging conditions, and federal assistance was required to support some response efforts in Ontario and in British Columbia as well. And before I speak to those situations, I just want to comment really briefly on how emergency management works in Canada. So, emergencies are managed firstly at a local level. And when that capacity is exceeded, provinces and territories take over the response. And when they need additional capacity, specialized support of some kind from the federal government, we provide what we call surge capacity. And for First Nations communities on reserve, the federal government also has some responsibilities and works directly with those communities through ISK. And Minister Gull-Masty will have more to say about that. So when we receive a federal request for assistance, and it is approved, which we deal with very, very quickly, it doesn't mean that the federal government takes over the response on the ground. It really means that we add federal resources to support provinces and territories with respect to their on the ground response. So, my role as Minister of Emergency Management is to make sure that that federal support is deployed as quickly as can be and that it's provided to where it's needed most. En tant que ministre, mon rôle est de m'assurer que le soutien puisse être déployé rapidement lorsqu'il est nécessaire. So, over the past few weeks, we've really seen that work in action. And in northwestern Ontario, intense wildfire conditions forced the evacuation of a number of communities, including numerous First Nations communities. And so you'll remember that Ontario submitted what they called a precautionary request for federal assistance, and that was to support air evacuations. And in response to that, we mobilized federal resources, including support from the Canadian Armed Forces, to help move people to safety. And we did that in collaboration with Ontario and with First Nations leadership. So some residents there have been able to return home while others remain evacuated. And we continue to monitor the situation in northwestern Ontario very closely. Then, just moving to British Columbia, conditions have deteriorated rapidly, especially in the last month, and particularly in the Fraser Canyon and in the Okanagan regions. And I want to extend my very deepest condolences to the families and the loved ones of the person that lost their life as a result of the Summerland fire. And to everyone and every community that's been impacted by this year's wildfires in BC, my thoughts are with you. I know that this is such a difficult and uncertain and incredibly challenging time. So, following British Columbia's request for assistance, which was to help with shelter and with accommodation for evacuees, the federal government worked really closely with the province, and we helped identify federal facilities that could be integrated into the province-led response on the ground. And I'm really happy to report that as of yesterday, the Vernon Cadet Camp is ready to receive evacuees when needed. And I also want to thank the Canadian Red Cross and Salvation Army and St. John's Ambulance, as well as the Canadian Armed Forces, the forces for making the facility available, and the other three humanitarian groups for their support in organizing the facility, like setting it up and then whatever needs to happen in the weeks to come. So across the country then, the wildfire season remains serious, and we need to remember, and we always do, that behind every statistic we see, it's not just about statistics, it's families, communities, people, lives that have been disrupted. And while firefighting and evacuations are an important part of the job we do, we know that we need to work harder to reduce wildfire risk before disaster strikes. And that's why the federal government and the government of Quebec have very recently announced a joint investment of $22 million to support fire smart measures. And with this agreement, the federal government now has agreements in place with all provinces and territories to support the Fire Smart initiative. And that will put in place things such as vegetation management, public awareness, and community planning. So, really, things that will mitigate and make communities more resilient. So, in closing, I want to again thank the firefighters, first responders, emergency workers, Indigenous leaders, First Nations leadership, and volunteers working around the clock. Thank you so very much. Your work in protecting lives and communities across this country is fundamental, and it's so appreciated. And to Canadians in affected areas, please follow local alerts and evacuation orders. When you do this, you can keep yourself and your family, your community, and first responders, you can help them in helping keep all of those other people safe. So the federal government, again, will continue to be there for communities for as long as we are needed. Thank you so much, and I will now turn things over to Minister Gull-Masty for her comments.
Thank you, Miigwech. Bonjour, hello. J'aimerais remercier tout le monde qui est venu aujourd'hui. Je suis très heureux d'être ici avec mon collègue, la ministre Olszewski, pour cette mise à jour. We know that across the country, First Nations are facing another difficult wildfire season. We're also working closely with First Nations, provinces, territories, and local partners to keep people safe while making sure communities have the resources that they need in these emergency situations. Communities in British Columbia continue to face significant wildfire activity in the southern interior and also on Vancouver Island. In northwestern Ontario, many First Nations have spent weeks responding to one of the largest wildfires and wildfire seasons in the province's history, and also facing dangerous conditions, evacuations, and uncertainty. Nous pensons aussi aux Premières Nations de Alberta, de la Saskatchewan,
We're also
du
thinking of the First
Manitoba et
Nations
du
from
Québec
the
et du
Saskatchewan,
Canada
Manitoba,
Atlantique qui ont
Quebec, and
combattu des feux
Canada
cette année
who
aussi.
have had to fight
Et on
wildfires this
soutient les
year.
communautés qui
And
se
we support
remettent
the
encore
communities that are continuing to
à des
recover
feux
and
des deux
rebuild
dernières années.
from fires of the
I'd
last few
also like to
years.
take just a moment to acknowledge the state of the work that's being done in my very own riding within the Cree Nation territory in EUSG, who have also faced wildfire season this year and have resulted in not having to evacuate, but nonetheless have undertaken extensive work to ensure the safety of the members. I would like to take some time today to recognize the leadership that Chief and Council members, first responders, First Nations emergency management coordinators, and all community leaders who continue to put themselves on the front lines to protect their communities through these emergency situations. I'd like to also commend Ontario Regional Chief Benedict, Grand Chief Linda de Brasseguet, and Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler, and all local chiefs within the territory for their leadership during the Northwestern Ontario's ongoing emergency wildfire season, and as well Chief Dan Wilson from the Okanagan Indian Band for his leadership during the Bradley Creek wildfire. Nous savons que les saisons de feux de forêt sont de plus en plus longues,
We know that the
intenses
wildfire
et
seasons are becoming
imprévisibles.
longer,
Et les
more
Premières
intense,
Nations
and
font
more
face à la
unpredictable,
risque
and
plus
First
élevé.
Nations are facing a higher
80% des
risk.
Premières Nations sont dans
80%
les
of First
régions
Nations
à
are
risque
located
de
in
feux de
regions
forêt.
with elevated
Since our last
wildfire risk.
update, in the beginning of July, 40 wildland fires have impacted 38 First Nations communities across Canada. A total of 4,294 people from 25 First Nations have been evacuated, with 1,425 evacuees from 19 communities still displaced. Behind these numbers are people, families, and communities who have been forced to flee their homes and live with uncertainty of not knowing when they can return. Some are leaving their communities for the very first time. I can trust and understand that this is very stressful. My department and I remain in close contact with communities and leadership to ensure that we're able to swiftly and effectively respond to their needs as they arise. I'd like to thank the many chiefs who've taken the opportunity, along with their council members, to speak with me in the past few weeks as we've been undertaking this work. Increasingly, wildfire seasons are complex and require every order of government to work together. When emergencies happen, local and provincial and territorial authorities lead in that initial response in partnership with First Nations, while the federal government provides additional support where it is needed in specialized and surge capacity. As the Minister of Indigenous Services, my priority is to ensure that First Nations have access to the supports they need before, during, and after an emergency. To strengthen how we are working together, we're also working towards implementing multilateral emergency management agreements between First Nations, provinces, territories, and the federal government. These agreements can be seen within many different places. We see the successful case in PEI, which sets out clear roles and responsibilities before emergencies happen, strengthen coordination, and recognize First Nations as full and equal partners in emergency planning and response. Quand une urgence arrive, mon ministre couvre 100% des coûts admissibles sur
When an emergency
l'intervention et de
occurs,
le retour
my
à la
department covers
normale avec le
100% of
programme
eligible
d'aide et la
costs for
gestion des
response and
urgences.
recovery
Ça
through the
peut
Emergency
inclure
Management Assistance
l'hébergement,
Program.
le
This
transport,
may
la
include housing,
nourriture et les vêtements,
transportation, food, and
et aussi
clothing,
la sécurité,
as well as safety, mental health
le soutien
support,
santé mentale et
and
les services
emergency
sociaux
social
d'urgence.
services.
Our role as part of emergency response is only part of our responsibility. We are also helping work with communities to reduce the risk before an emergency happens. That means investing in First Nations led preparedness, prevention, and capacity so that communities have people, plans, and equipment in place before they need them. Earlier this year, I announced an additional investment of $55 million to support emergency management capacity, preparedness, mitigation, and emergency management coordinators. These investments have helped communities prepare and respond to this wildfire season. In Ontario, we continue to work with the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario to build on the successful training of 100 Indigenous wildland firefighters last year and training at least another 100 more this year. In British Columbia, we were able to provide $375,000 to the Emergency Planning Secretariat to help maintain coastal Chelas communities to prepare for drought, fire, and extreme heat. The Secretariat is also helping communities find resources and ensure that they're providing support for emergency operations and reception centers when needed. Au Québec, nous avons aidé le Conseil de Wabanaki à soutenir 37 Premières Nations. Le Conseil offre de la formation en aide et l'assistance pour aider les communautés de mettre à jour leur plan d'urgence. In Atlantic Canada, First Nations and tribal communities received $718,000 in Fire Smart funding for things like vegetation management in areas of high-risk wildfire. Emergency Services Canada funds 320 First Nations emergency management coordination positions across the country. These in-community coordinators play a critical role in planning, responding, and coordinating emergency and recovery efforts. Cet exemple montre des solutions développées par les Premières Nations pour mieux préparer les communautés et de réduire les risques avant une urgence. Preparedness does not stop when the fire is out. The Building Back Better approach that we instituted, we are working with First Nations communities during recovery to rebuild in ways that reduce risk and make communities safer and more resilient for the future. I know this wildfire season has been extremely challenging for many communities. Through it all, First Nations have responded with extraordinary leadership, courage, and resilience. To every family and community affected by these wildfires, we do see what you have gone through. We stand with you, and our thoughts are with you every step of the way. And most importantly, we will continue to support you in the work that you do for your members. Nous allons continuer de travailler avec les Premières Nations avant, pendant et après les feux. Nous renforcerons la préparation avant les urgences et de mieux préparer pour l'avenir. Je vous remercie. Thank you, Miigwech.
Okay, thank you. We will now turn to the question and answer period. We'll start in the room with any questions that we have here. If you're joining us by Zoom and you have a question, please raise your hand now so I can see. We'll start in the room. We can start with Inès Lambardo.
Bonjour, merci à vous deux. Je vais poser ma question en français. J'espère que la ministre Olszewski pourra répondre, même en anglais, il n'y a pas de problème. Ma première question, c'est que le gouvernement canadien a procédé à des compressions d'emplois, des emplois clés dans la recherche scientifique qui permettaient de mieux faire face aux feux. On parle de spécialistes responsables de cartographier des feux de forêt, des inondations, de surveiller la qualité de l'air. Et ça a eu des impacts sur le travail de plusieurs ministères, notamment vos deux ministères. Donc, je voulais savoir, avez-vous des solutions alternatives et savez-vous comment ce travail sera remplacé concrètement au sein des ministères? Merci.
She did say that you could respond in English, Minister Olszewski.
Yeah, I do not have translation.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, if you could help me, Minister, I can do that.
Her question pertains to a reduction of positions in terms of research, mapping, response to flooding, which she thinks contributed or had an impact on this season, and is looking to understand if you have alternative solutions to respond to the gap that she thinks is in place.
You know, from my perspective, it's my understanding that that nothing has been done either in terms of flood management or wildfire management that would affect in an operational way what our response has been this season to either one of those types of emergency situations. And, I know that there were some media articles with respect to the operation of the Government Operations Center in Ottawa, and some discussion about reduction in the number of positions at the GOC. And I can advise that approximately, it's a little over 10 permanent positions were reduced over the last year, but those reductions did not in any way affect the operational capacity of that center. And in addition to that, we always have in place the ability to employ surge capacity. And we've used that surge capacity at places like the GOC in terms of, so the Government Operations Center, in terms of recent events like the G7 and the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And so those would be my comments at this time. Thank you for the question.
Is that okay? Ok. Je comprends aussi que c'est un effort conjoint avec les provinces et territoires, mais sur les feux uniquement, vous avez fait plusieurs annonces de plusieurs millions de dollars pour la résilience climatique. Seulement, quand on regarde au détail, par exemple, le 34 derniers millions de dollars, il y a eu seulement 70 000 dollars pour la municipalité de Jasper pour mieux se préparer au feu. Donc, je voulais savoir, à ce stade, vu le nombre de feux, d'évacuations, est-ce qu'il y a des discussions sur un éventuel projet de loi pour les prochaines saisons de feu pour s'adapter réellement?
Est-ce que tu es capable de poser en anglais ou voulez-vous que je traduise encore?
Je crois qu'il y a la traduction, non?
Donc, c'est moi la ministre Gull-Masty qui fait ta traduction pour vous. Je vais juste prendre la dernière portion de la question. She's asking based on, I'm generalizing the first part of the question. She's asking based on the fire activity that we've seen in the country, is there any discussion or potential work on legislation that relates to how fire management and climate resilience is determined in our government and country?
So I can respond in the sense that at the current time, we're not looking at legislation per se, but that said, over the last year, we've taken many steps with respect to preparing, like helping communities prepare for wildfire situations. There are a number of departments that deal with that, such as NRCan, which is responsible for the science related to forest management, as well as wildfire situations. In addition, we've invested in suppression, so wildfire suppression, in terms of aerial firefighting assets, in terms of strengthening our response using the Government Operations Center, in terms of improving our national alerting system, which we're in the process of doing, so which would cover other types of natural disasters as well. And so apart from legislation, our focus is always on all aspects of emergency management. And when it comes to wildfires, that covers, as I say, the science and the prevention, the mitigation, the response, as well as the recovery. So we're always looking at ways that we can improve in those areas. And I've already addressed a number of the ways that we've made investments over the past year.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Gull-Masty, as well for your interpretation there. I will say to Minister Olszewski, there should be a button on your Zoom that should allow you to have interpretation, is from what I understand in the room. But for our next question, we'll go to Jillian Piper from Global News.
Thank you for taking questions today. This one will be in English. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to impose a wildfire smoke tariff on Canada. Meanwhile, the head of the Government Operations Center just said that there are currently no American firefighters helping Canada with its wildfires right now. Do you think that that threat from the U.S. is justified?
Just with respect to what happens regarding our relationship with the United States, I can tell you that in the emergency management sphere, we've had a really, truly decades-long history of working together collaboratively with the Americans in terms of emergency management. And that means that from year to year, the U.S. has provided firefighters and other personnel to assist us, and we've done the same in response. This year's wildfire season is very intense in the United States as well, and particularly in Oregon and in Washington State. And so in terms of ability for the U.S. to provide firefighting assistance, it's just not there. And with respect to our situation as well, both countries, is what I'm getting to, is both Canada and the United States have relied this wildfire season on some international firefighting personnel, which I mentioned in my remarks. And at the present time, there's about 500 international firefighters in the country. And so I really want to stress the trusted partnership and the long-standing relationship that we've had with the United States and that we really continue to have in the emergency management space.
Thank you for that. And just as a follow-up, I totally hear you that, we can only send resources, or certain countries can only send resources when they're able to. But I do believe that Canada sent firefighting resources to the U.S. this wildfire season. Is that correct?
It's my understanding, well, I do know for a fact that we did deploy 2 air tankers, like water bombers, as well as a bird dog for a short period of time to the United States. It was CIFC that manage that deployment as part of their normal operations. And so CIFC is the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, and it is in close contact throughout the wildfire season with its American counterpart, the National Interagency Fire Center. And so there was a request made for some assistance in terms of aerial firefighting capacity. And as I say, for a brief period of time, we did have 3 assets deployed to assist the Americans.
Okay, thanks. Fraser, Fraser Needham from APTN.
This question is for Minister Gull-Masty. In an interview with APTN News, Chief Helen Pavola of Collins First Nation in Northern Ontario said that you told her in a telephone call that ISC would rebuild the community for the First Nation, which has been burned down by fires. Is that true?
Thank you for the question. I was able to have 2 conversations with Chief regarding the situation. We did have the opportunity in the first call to inform her that we would be covering all costs pertaining to the evacuation itself. This is something where we cover 100% of all components in relation to the costs that are accumulated during the evacuation. And I did have a follow-up conversation with her speaking to the infrastructure and the portion of rebuilding the community. I'm waiting for those additional details to come in written format so that I can communicate them to her directly so that she can have clarity. But we do intend to work closely with the community to ensure that their members are able to go home. I think that this is of critical importance, not just for her to maintain, the support that's needed for those that are on a long-term evacuation, but also for them to know and understand that the Government of Canada is here to do that important work with you and to do the important work of making sure that your members are informed during and after the evacuation process. So I look forward to our continued conversations with her.
Okay, and just as a follow-up, this is for either minister or both. A number of First Nations, I think particularly in Ontario, have been not pleased with the government response from both Ontario and the federal government in terms of evacuations, how they've done things like that. And there's a number of that have called for a national inquiry looking into how things were handled in this fire season. Is that something that the government supports?
I just want to recognize that, looking at the situation in Northern Ontario, there was a rapid and very intense sudden increase of wildfire activity. And I also want to recognize that there were several communities as part of that situation that had to respond quite urgently. The work that was undertaken at the provincial level is something that I've had the opportunity to have a conversation with my counterpart in Ontario, just to speak to the importance of understanding and realizing that as we proceed through these wildfire seasons, we note the intensity, we note that they're continuing to be longer and quite challenging to understand at what point these things will be triggered. But we also want to ensure that in moving forward, we are taking those lessons learned at this time in this space to be sure that, when we have to action the partnership that it takes between both the provincial, federal, and First Nations communities to work together in a state of emergency, there's clarity in the roles, there's clarity in the steps that are taken, and that there's opportunity to really provide as much security and comfort as possible during and after the process. So I look to see what the next steps will be in Ontario, and I think for me, I'm taking this as information that will come forward that demonstrates how we can better enhance the mechanisms that are triggered when a fire or an emergency situation occurs, and how we as a federal partner can respond quicker and can be as supportive as much as possible in that specialized and surge capacity.
I'll just add a couple of comments. I absolutely agree. And thank you, Minister Gull-Masty, for your leadership with respect to your role and all that you've done to assist First Nations communities this wildfire season in Ontario and in British Columbia as well. Just with respect to response, I'd like to point out that both of those jurisdictions, Ontario and British Columbia, they have a very professional and very, very robust emergency management capability. And I agree with Minister Gull-Masty's comments. We know that in a number of these situations in Ontario and in British Columbia as well, these fires were fast and they're unpredictable. They're so much more intense. And everyone that I've talked to, basically in my discussions, roundtables across the country, has said they feel that, they know that that's what's happened to these fires. So all of that said, and just to add to what Minister Gull-Masty has already said, we can always do better. And part of what we always do in emergency management, regardless of the level of government, whether it's local, provincial, territorial, federal, we're always looking back to see what we could have done better this season before. And so I'll just emphasize that I know that that process is something that will happen at every level because it always does. And I know that for me, I will have an opportunity to meet personally with my provincial and territorial counterparts at our annual in-person meeting, which will be in November. And looking back at the fire season that was is something that we'll have very rich and detailed discussions regarding. And again, we're always looking at ways to improve.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions online. If you're joining us by Zoom and you have a question, please raise your hand now. We'll go to Nick Murray from the Canadian Press. Nick, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. I just want to follow up a little bit on some of the questions around the availability and offering of U.S. resources to help Canada fight their own firefighters or our own wildfires. Just to kind of clarify, have there been U.S. personnel or U.S. firefighters helping us at any point this fire season?
And my understanding with respect to the type of personnel that provided assistance is that it was in the area of logistics and a sort of ancillary support, and not in terms of firefighting capability. And as I've indicated earlier, the Americans are having their own very, very difficult wildfire fighting season.
Okay, and just to be clear, do we have any firefighter support in the U.S. from Canada right now, or at any point this fire season?
We, from a federal perspective, we do not. It's my understanding, and I think I saw something in the media yesterday, that the province of Alberta may have provided some support.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Salim Valji from the CBC.
Hi there. I assume you can hear me. I'm just wondering, Alberta's wildfires have actually, it seems like it's been a very good season for us in that regard, but in these announcements, is there anything specifically towards Alberta or announcements that'll affect the wildfire season taking place here in this province?
I think many of the things that Minister Gull-Masty and I have already talked about, whether it's support for First Nations or the various steps that we've already taken in terms of leasing aerial firefighting equipment, etc. All of the things that we've talked about would benefit the province of Alberta across the board. If Alberta required, which hasn't needed at all this season, additional support, that is, if they were ever beyond their capacity, they would be able to make a request for federal assistance in the same way that other provinces and territories do. And I would just like to add a point about just about how resources are shared. So CIFC, we've already talked about the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. They're the agency, they're a conglomeration basically of all of the provinces and territories with federal government input as well. And it's CIFC that makes decisions with respect to the operational deployment of firefighters and aircraft as well. And so when there's a province like Alberta that has excess capability this wildfire season, through CIFC, Alberta can send aerial firefighting resources to other provinces, and they have in fact done that this year. They sent resources to British Columbia to help there, and possibly to Ontario as well. I'm just not sure about the latter. So that's how it works. There's a mutual sharing between provinces and territories when some provinces and territories are having a less challenging wildfire season.
Okay, thank you.
And Salim, do you have a follow-up?
I do not, no.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to Claire McFarlane from Cabin Radio. Claire, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. So there are leaders of First Nations communities located off reserve in the Northwest Territories that have asked for direct support for things like fire smarting initiatives, as well as training and resources to help tackle fires on their own before they get too large. They are asking for those supports direct from the federal government. Is this something that either minister would consider looking more into?
Thank you. I'll respond first. The complexities of the Northwest Territories and the communities that are not located on the type of jurisdiction that is recognized in the program is one of the challenges. We do work closely and directly with the communities nonetheless in all capacities. And I think that it is one of the areas where we are looking to try to ensure that there is greater clarity for the quality and the use of the program. So we will continue working in this space. Meanwhile, while we are doing these things within Indigenous Services Canada, there is still the opportunity of support when the Northwest Territories makes that request to proceed under the emergency management process.
It's a great question, Claire, and I will just add to that. Minister Gull-Masty and I have had discussions over the past number of months, and absolutely we will continue to do so in that area. Thank you.
And Claire, do you have a follow-up question?
I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will go to Wallone from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Hi, good
can
afternoon.
hear you. It might be better if you're able to put the microphone a bit closer, but we can
Yeah,
hear you.
okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to ask a question to both minister. Like we have seen misinformation spread rapidly on social media, like Facebook, during the wildfire season. My question is like, are you aware of the situation? Like sometimes creating confusion about the evacuation orders, air quality risks, and because the cause of the fire. How concerned are you about the misinformation becoming a public safety threat, and also like what is your strategy to combat without undermining the public's trust?
So mis and disinformation was an issue last wildfire season, and it has been this season as well. You know, from a federal perspective, what we are asking people to do is to make sure that they, when they're looking for information about wildfires, that they obtain that information from provincial sources, that is, you know, from emergency management divisions, whether it's in BC or other provinces, so that they can make sure that what they receive is as accurate as it can be.
Thank you. I think it is one of the challenges when you're working in emergency. People want to be informed. People want to have that information in a rapid and timely way. That is why, in undertaking all of our operations and in support of the First Nations communities, we do also ask them to ensure that if they are sourcing any kind of information, they are responding and receiving that information from the officials that are appointed in those roles, such as the leadership of the community or emergency management coordinators, who are often going on air either through social media, Facebook, or even at the local radio station level, communicating those things directly to their members. So it can be challenging. I want to acknowledge that, you know, people want to have that information in a timely way, but we want to ensure safety and we want to ensure that there's clarity, which is why we always encourage and share the information that comes from the official sources, both at the local or regional capacity in terms of who is taking the lead and providing service to the community.
Yeah, there are a number of ways to get that information officially, and I know I've seen British Columbia's app, and it's incredibly valuable. It's like it'll set out which communities are under evacuation order. It'll indicate how many firefighters are present. There's some really good information available through official sources, and you know, Minister Gull-Masty and I just can't stress enough how important it is to follow that advice. And to her point about you know, about radio, television as well, a number of times provincial ministers will be giving updates. I know that Minister Green in British Columbia was giving an update at around the same time as this event today, and so that's the kind of advice that communities can rely upon.
Thank you. Wallone, do you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Kyle Bax from CBC News. Kyle, go ahead.
Hi there, Mr. Olszewski. A question about whether you have made a decision or are close to making a decision about whether to order more Canadair water bombers in partnership with your provincial counterparts.
So that's a great question, Kyle, and I've certainly seen a number of media reports that talk about that. We will, of course, work closely with and are working closely with provinces and territories to take a look at, you know, their fleets. It's a complicated question because provinces and territories own some firefighting assets, but they also lease a number themselves. And then this year we added surge capacity in the form of, a federal fleet. And we'll be taking a hard look, as I say, in conjunction with provinces and territories to determine what the best path forward is, and if a decision is made with respect to aircraft, how, what kind of aircraft that would be, because there are water bombers sometimes, heavy lift helicopters are better in some situations. So there's an importance to having the right mix fleet as well. But it's a great question, Kyle. Thank you.
I guess my follow-up question is, when could we actually expect a decision to be made about this?
I'm going to say by the end of the year. And certainly in time for next year's firefight. We'll be making a decision with respect to leased aircraft quite quickly, because we will want those to be in place for the next wildfire season. Placing aircraft orders is another story in terms of when that type of craft might be available. So that's really something to plan. That's more medium term planning, as opposed to, what we'd be able to put in place for next year. And we need to be considering both kinds of planning.
Thank you. I believe we have time for just one more question. So we'll go to Corey Correa from CBC. Corey, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one question for perhaps both ministers to address. As mentioned in the technical briefing, climate change is driving yet another year of damaging wildfires. What more is the federal government planning to do to address climate change and prevent worsening wildfires?
So, the government's taken, our government's taken a number of steps in that regard. And I know if you've been following, because I certainly wouldn't have time to go through everything this morning, but Minister de Brusen in ECCC has made a number of announcements with respect to steps the government's taken to address climate change. We know that climate change is contributing to disasters such as wildfires, and the intensity and severity and frequency, and we are committed to taking action. And I know that our government will be taking the approach that we need to adapt somewhat from what we were doing in previous years in order to meet those challenges. I know that in terms of, some people raise concerns in terms of major projects, and certainly something like the MOU that was signed with Alberta has, from the very first agreement through the other 3, 4, and 5 agreements that were signed with Alberta, really put dealing with climate change front and center, first and foremost, in terms of the kinds of agreements that were reached between, just as an example, the province of Alberta and the federal government. And so that meant doing things such as setting an effective industrial carbon price, dealing with methane emissions. You would have heard the Prime Minister speak and heard yesterday's announcement with respect to the very large the hydroelectric project that will supply clean energy, a vast amount of clean energy. So those are just some of the steps that our government is taking.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to add 2 little parts to my colleague here. I think that we are really taking a pragmatic approach to what we're doing to ensure that we're implementing strategies that are going to respond in a very concrete way. Yesterday's announcement on the electricity strategy is something that, I think was very welcomed at the provincial level and is welcomed across the country, because we know that this is one of the approaches that really drives down emissions. And this is a huge contributing factor to how we can manage in that space. I've also seen some of the work that is done by my colleague, Minister de Brusen, in terms of her nature strategy. I'm very supportive in this space. Not only is she protecting more land and water, she's undertaking an initiative that I think is really important in the climate work that we're doing. I believe we are also going to see a lot more work that will be done in the finance space in terms of our climate objectives, and and how we're going to work and cooperate with other countries that are going to help us achieve that in that global economic context. And I'm very pleased to work with a prime minister who sees this as something that is urgent and is part of his strategy to really offer that strength to our country to protect our position and create capacity and create more initiatives for Canadians in terms of how we can build a Canada strong.
Okay, thank you, ministers. We'll end the press conference there. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all reporters for being here today.